Okay, so we're going to continue working on the railroad-oriented programming with validation. They kind of go pretty close together because validation is typically the first step in your railway-oriented programming. So here we're going to validate the record. Let's see. Instead of calling that models, let's just call it DTO and make models part of our namespace. So we need our validate helper functions to get this to work. And you can see the validate record below there. It figures out if it's null, and then if it isn't, then it'll step through each one. And so the validate function that I'm working on right now, that will step through each field in our object and concatenate all that information and bring it together into a single one. That's what I'm doing with the fold there. So if it fails, then we bring it together. If it doesn't, then we'll just pass back the whole object. And since we're passing back the full object, we can put this all in a single list. And I find in functional programming, it's really nice to have lists of things. I find that that's kind of a standard practice, is to have lists. So you could see I did the backwards pipe. That just makes it a little cleaner, so you don't have all the parentheses. It makes it a little nicer, and not necessary. Just however you prefer. In Haskell, you'll see the $sign for the backwards pipe, and they don't ever. In Haskell, it doesn't come straight with a forward pipe, which is kind of strange. You'd think that'd be pretty standard, but I guess that was, I don't know when that came about. It'd be interesting to find out, though. So here, I'm going to create a static class. And so I use those, the validate record helper function to do that. And the validate class actually has, you pass it the object. So it'd be like passing the person object there. But since I use currying, I don't need to actually put the actual object parameter there. So, like I said before, sometimes it is nicer just to put the parameter because people aren't used to it, and it can make the code a little clearer. But since it's such a standard function that you use, it's not really that necessary, because once you get used to using it, you know it. So validate record, the first sentence you see up there is saying, okay, if the record, the object, doesn't exist, then this is the message you pass back. So in this case, the person is not existential. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but and here you see me do the validate p.name.first, and normally you'd want another wrapper function around that, because you need to check that the name object actually exists, because if you pass it in, it's not going to work. But I didn't do that. I just kept it simple for this purpose, but it wouldn't be that difficult to actually do. So there you see all my helper functions that I created. And what's nice about functional programming is they're just functions. They're real easy to create. It's not that big of a deal. You want to validate something, you just keep the same signature. So in this case, like non-empty string, you pass in a string and it returns the either fail or okay. So okay would have the object in there, and fail would have the message. And since I do the required string, and the string can't be, a empty string, I said, hey, let's just create a value for that, just to make it easy, because I use it so much. But you could see it confused me there, because I was like, okay, oh yeah, you're supposed to put in a list there. So let's see. So gotta think about the logic. And sometimes, like I did before, sometimes it's nice to say what the actual variable is, so you can get your IntelliSense, because you don't really get in the IntelliSense until you start using it. So I'm just thinking here, how should this be done? So I was like, well, I could make this more generic just by saying must be before. There you go. And we could even make it more generic and say, and pass in you say, hey, you have to pass in a message also. But I think we're good enough here. You always mess up those less than or equal, less than or greater than signs. So I always have to think a little bit, which direction should that go? Kind of like figuring out north, south, west, east. Okay, so the same pattern, just message for the fail. And then this message will put the actual item in there. Say, okay, well, you gave me, you gave me this date that it needs to be before, and it didn't match, so we're going to say it must be before this date. We're going to assume that they already know what the date they supplied us with. You could alternatively add the date that they gave you too, which would probably be pretty nice. Be more of a friendly message. You gave me this date, and it should have been before this date, but it's not. So here I'm wondering, like, why is this not working? That's because I didn't make it a list like I should have. Okay, and there we got my list.